They say one man's trash is another man's treasure. Well, taking a look at the waiver wire here for week 12, maybe that could be said here also. Then again, all these guys could just turn out to be one big pile of shit. What is going on, Headliner Nation? Jake, Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully you guys are all doing well out there. Welcome now to week 12 fantasy football. Can't believe it's already week 12, and we have a few teams on bye again, so we need to take a look at the waiver wire. What is out there that may have some value? Hopefully, maybe something better than Brian Hill, who did absolutely nothing last week. Kyle actually wasn't too high on Brian Hill last week. I thought he was crazy. Turned out Kyle was right. But who is out there and available this week that could have some value? That's what we're talking about here today. Like I said, there are a few teams that are on bye week this week. We have the Arizona Cardinals, Kansas City Chiefs, the Los Angeles Chargers, and Minnesota Vikings. So some fantasy viable options will not be available this week. We need to plug some holes, deep in our bench maybe a little bit to make that playoff run, and that's what we're doing today. I got a few quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, even a couple defenses here, so stick around to the end. We have a lot of options here for everybody in every league size. But without taking any further time, let's dive right into the quarterback position first. All right, so just like all of our other waiver wire shows, we're trying to hit those guys who are less than 50% owned. Trying to reach a bunch of people out there that can hopefully go to their waiver wire and find some of these guys available. So saying that, we're going to start off with the quarterback position. And the first guy up, it's going to be Sam Darnold. And please don't shut the video off. Just hear me out. Right now, he's only 22% owned. And we just named a couple teams that are going to be on bye week that you may, be without a fantasy viable quarterback. No Kyler Murray, Patrick Mahomes, Phillip Rivers, even Kirk Cousins. Maybe you have been starting them over the past few weeks and you need a streaming option. Sam Darnold isn't bad. He has a matchup this week going up against the Oakland Raiders. Oakland gives up right now the 7th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks at 23.8 fantasy points per game. Over his last 2 games, he's thrown 6 touchdowns to only 1 interception, and his average scoring right around 28 fantasy points per game in those 2 games. Listen, I get it. Just a few short weeks ago, this guy looked like he'd never played quarterback in the NFL, like ever. But as a streaming option here in Week 12, I don't hate Sam Darnold. Another name on the list, Jeff Driscoll. Never in a million years did I ever expect to be sitting here telling the people that, hey, it's not a bad idea to go out there and pick up Jeff Driscoll of the Detroit Lions. But right now, he's only 3% owned, and he's been filling in quite nicely for an injured Matthew Stafford, who may be out rest of the season. Plus, Jeff Driscoll's kind of, sneaking in some rushing yards. The guy has 88 rushing yards over his last 2 games. I know those aren't Lamar Jackson type numbers, but if you can sneak in 3 or 4, points, fantasy points from rushing, that just helps add to that safety of a floor. He threw 3 touchdowns last week against a very difficult Dallas secondary, and he's going against the Washington Redskins this week, who allow on average just over 21 fantasy points per game. He is another one of those guys who is a streaming option that gives you somebody to look at that more than likely is available on a lot of waiver wires. Another name that I did not include on here because he is over 50% owned, it's Baker Mayfield. And I know a lot of people want to hate on Baker, but he's playing the Dolphins and he's played a lot better here the past couple weeks. Only 1 interception over his last 3 games. If he's out there and he's available, another great streaming option here for Week 12. All right, moving on to the running back position. First guy up, Darius Geis, Washington Redskins. Now, he's at 46% owned, so a lot of you guys out there may not have the opportunity to go after Darius Geis, but if he's available, he's definitely a name to look at. He had his first game back this past week, only saw 8 total touches. However, Adrian Peterson only saw 11 total touches, so it's not like this is Adrian Peterson's backfield by any means. And we saw the big playability of Darius Geis this past week with a 45-yard screen pass touchdown that really showed some sort of life in this offense for the Redskins. Now, they want him to be the guy in this backfield. They drafted him to be the number 1 running back here. Don't forget, back at the beginning of the season, Adrian Peterson was a healthy scratch when Darius Geis was 100% healthy and active. Now, is he 100% yet? It's going to take him a couple weeks maybe to get up to speed, but he's got some great matchups coming up. So if you have room on the bottom of your bench, he's not a bad stash. He's got games going up against the Lions, the Panthers, the Packers, some solid games here in the next few weeks that could kind of give you some flexibility if you need it. He's not going to be somebody that you pick right up off the waiver wire, throw into your starting lineup, and you're super excited about it, but the upside of Darius Geis is definitely there. Next up, Bo Scarborough. A lot of people are probably like, who the heck is Bo Scarborough? Well, 11% of people know who he is because they own him as of right now. But it's finally time to maybe free Bo Scarborough, who's getting one of his first opportunities here in the NFL. And right now, he's the most effective runner in this backfield for Detroit. It's not saying a whole lot, but he's had the most carries last week with 14 that we've seen in Detroit since week 4 with Kerryon Johnson. He's going to get the bulk of the touches. Now he has a matchup going up against the Washington Redskins, who give up on average 21.3 fantasy points per game, 8th most in the NFL. He's a streaming option. He's not sexy by any means. You're not excited to throw him in there, but if you're dealing with injuries, bye weeks, whatever it may be, Bo Scarborough is not a bad option. Next one up is going to be Jonathan Williams. Now of the Indianapolis Colts, he's only 1% owned. And really the only reason we're talking about him is because of the injury to Marlon Mack, the broken hand, had surgery, and Jonathan Williams came in and had a huge day, 147 total yards with him. However, is this going to turn into a committee? There's already been hints that this is going to be a committee in Indianapolis between Williams, Hines, and even Jordan Wilkins could come back and eat into some of these carries. We just don't know yet. Jonathan Williams is not somebody who I would go out there and spend a lot of my fab budget on, a number one waiver priority, nothing like that, just because of the chance that he really falls into a committee. And it's somewhat of a tough matchup this week, going up against the Houston Texans. They only allow 16 fantasy points per game, even though Baltimore crushed them on the ground last week, but it's Baltimore. They pretty much crush everybody on the ground. He's just not a must-add in my opinion. He may show flashes at times, but he's really not somebody who's going to save your fantasy season and is a must-have here in Week 12 in my opinion. He does have upside in this offense. However, so does Nyheim Hines, and I don't know if maybe he's somebody you can get maybe a little bit cheaper if he's available out there also, because everybody's going to be shooting for the bigger name, the bigger game, coming off a bigger game in Jonathan Williams. So Nyheim Hines is another name to pay attention to. Last guy, it's going to be Trey Edmonds of the Pittsburgh Steelers, only 3% owned right now, and Pittsburgh is really hurting for offensive weapons. There's a chance in this game coming up that they don't have Juju, Deontay Johnson, or James Conner. If that's the case, we're going to see a lot of James Washington, Trey Edmonds, and then Jalen Samuels also. More than likely, Jalen Samuels is over that 50% threshold in your league, but he's in line for more touches also. But Trey Edmonds is definitely somebody who has some opportunity now. He has a great pass-catching upside here in this offense. He's averaging 4.3 yards per carry and has a great matchup this week going up against the Cincinnati Bengals, who allow 24.1 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. That's the 4th most in the NFL. A possible streaming option if all those main guys sit here for the Pittsburgh Steelers in Week 12. All right, wide receivers now, and the first guy up on the list is going to be Deebo Samuel, San Francisco 49ers, currently 32% owned, so there's a chance he could be out there on your waiver wire. And the guy is playing great as of late, making some athletic catches. He's had back-to-back 100-yard games, 16 receptions out of the last 2 weeks combined. Emmanuel Sanders, still somewhat banged up, tried to go this past week, couldn't make it the entire game. How much of him do we see here going forward in the next couple weeks? Does George Kittle return? If Kittle misses and Sanders misses, once again, Deebo Samuel turns into a solid flex play on a weekly basis. As these guys return and get back to health, yeah, he'll take a slight hit. However, this chemistry that he's building right now in this time with Jimmy G is almost invaluable going forward. We saw Dante Pettis go on a run at the end of last season. This could be Deebo's time to make a similar type of run. If he's available, he's a wide receiver that I'm targeting. Next up, it's going to be Randall Cobb, Dallas Cowboys, currently 32% owned. And lately, it's kind of like vintage Randall Cobb, right? I mean, he's also had back-to-back 100-yard games, touchdowns in back-to-back games, and he's really benefiting right now from all the defensive attention that's going towards Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, in the backfield to Zeke, and nobody is paying attention to Randall Cobb. And they have a matchup coming up with the New England Patriots. They're going to have to throw the ball in order to win in this game. They're going to try to establish Zeke early, and if that defense can be brought in, Randall Cobb may be the one bright spot in this offense this week, going up against an elite New England defense. So if you have room on your bench, Randall Cobb isn't a bad option. Now, is he somebody that you can count on for these type of numbers every single week? No, especially not this week coming up against the Patriots. However, he's got that sneaky value, and if he's sitting on your waiver wire, it's a name to consider. Next up, a name we just mentioned about a slide ago, right? James Washington of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mentioned that Juju and Deontay Johnson could miss this game, as well as possibly James Conner. Really, who benefits from that maybe the most? It may be James Washington. He could see huge volume in this passing game, and now he gets a matchup with the Cincinnati Bengals, who give up on average 22 fantasy points per game. It really depends who is available in this game. Johnson and Juju, do they actually play? If these guys sit, James Washington kind of becomes a must-start flex play, especially in PPR leagues, just because the volume is going to be there. Do I absolutely trust Mason Rudolph to deliver, a lot of catchable targets to James Washington? That's where it kind of gets a little bit dicey. However, volume alone makes James Washington a potential add here in Week 12. Lastly, it's going to be N'Keal Harry here, New England Patriots. He is 12% owned right now. A lot of people bought into some of the hype with him playing his first game last week, and he came out and only saw 4 targets. Now, that's not, great volume, obviously, but it's his first game, and as the season progresses, I expect him to see more and more volume as him and Brady continue to develop that chemistry. Now, it really seems like he's taking away from the upside of Mohamed Sanu, who came in with, double-digit targets just, a couple weeks ago before their bye week, and now that N'Keal Harry is a part of the mix, he gives him that deep threat, that big playmaker that can go up there and get the 50-50 ball, a red zone threat, and he kind of takes this offense to another dimension. It just may take him a couple weeks to get it going. However, he's definitely a guy that I want to take advantage of if he's out there on the waiver wire, and I have room on my roster for him. He's got some great matchups coming up if he can get more active in this passing game, with matchups going up against Houston, Kansas City, and Cincinnati here second half of the season. N'Keal Harry, if he's available, also a name I'm looking at for the wide receiver position. Moving on to tight ends, the football kind. First one up, Jacob Hollister, Seattle Seahawks, who's currently 27% owned. Kind of expected him to be a little bit higher owned, but he is coming off a bye week, so that may, play a part in that. But this guy is basically the new Will Dissly in this offense. He's gained the trust of Russell Wilson, and he has 12 catches for 99 yards and 3 touchdowns over his last 2 games played. With a tight end position that is so weak as is, if you're losing options like Travis Kelce or Hunter Henry this coming up week, this becomes a serious option if he's out there on your waiver wire. Take a look, see if he's there. He would be my number 1 option here for the tight end position. Next up is going to be Ryan Griffin, though, of the New York Jets. Now that we know Chris Herndon is not going to play, we can quit talking about him on waiver wire shows. And Ryan Griffin becomes kind of an option. He's only 2% owned, but he's highly inconsistent. He had 0 points in Week 10 and came out and put up 17 points in Week 11. You just don't know what you're going to get here with Ryan Griffin, but it's a great matchup this week. If you're looking for a streaming option, Oakland gives up, on average, 11 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, which is 3rd most in the NFL. He's a red zone threat, but he is a risk. If you're looking for a streaming tight end, Ryan Griffin, not a bad option. Next up, Cameron Brate, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Well, O.J. Howard has officially killed whatever value he had in fantasy football with his behind-the-back interception. It was absolutely horrible. The ball hit him right in the chest. Somehow he turned into a Harlem Globetrotter, decided to put it around his back and turn it, whatever it was. It really killed his fantasy value here going forward, but Cameron Brate took advantage of it. He saw 14 targets last week. 14 targets did Cameron Brate see for 10 receptions. And we know that Tampa Bay is going to rely on the passing game every single week of the season. Why do we know that? And how do we know that? Well, their running game overall kind of blows. So they're going to have to be forced to throw the ball. Cameron Brate has been a favorite of Jameis Winston in the past. Could he be once again? Entirely possible. And more than likely, he's out there on your waiver wire. Next up, David Njoku. He's coming back from injury this week. Now, do I expect a big, comeback from David Njoku? No, not really. But there is a matchup going up against the Miami Dolphins, which is intriguing. I know he's a lot of other mouths to feed in that offense, and he may take a few weeks to get back up to speed. He's not an ideal start here for Week 12. But if you have room on your roster to stash him maybe for a couple weeks, he's got some decent matchups here end of the season going up against Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, and Arizona. And we all know that Arizona likes to give up points in bunches to tight ends. That could pay off here late in the season. If you have room and you can drop somebody without a lot of value, David Njoku isn't a bad stash. Lastly, it wasn't really clickbait in the thumbnail. There's a big announcement coming from Rob Gronkowski. Do I think it means that he returns? I don't think so. But with Gronk, you just never know. He's been real cryptic lately, releasing some tweets and some videos of some old videos with him and Tom Brady, and he's hinting on this big announcement. If nothing else, if you have a deep roster, if you have somebody on your bench that absolutely sucks, it's just wasting space. Maybe you have an injured player on your bench. It's maybe not a bad idea to take a stab at it, I wouldn't drop anybody of huge value because, like I said, we don't even know if that's what this announcement is. But it's just a for fun name to throw out there. I kind of figured a lot of people would click on the thumbnail figuring, oh, and we're going to talk about Gronk and how Gronk's coming back. I don't see it happening, but would I be surprised? No, I wouldn't. Obviously, he isn't highly owned right now. And like I said, if you maybe just want to troll some of your buddies in your league, pick him up. You never know. You could have some ultimate bragging rights here second half of the season. For defenses, this one's a little bit tricky this week. I don't imagine there's a whole lot of great options maybe available on your waiver wire. Detroit is going to Washington to play the Redskins this week. We know what that Washington Redskins offense has looked like lately. Pretty horrible. Decent matchup for the Detroit Lions. They'll be a big streaming option this week. The Tennessee Titans, not the greatest matchup going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now that Nick Foles is back under center, they seem to be moving the ball and scoring some points in Jacksonville. But the Tennessee Titans is an above-average defense, and coming off the bye week, they've had an extra week to game plan for this game. The game is going to be at home in Tennessee. Not a bad streaming option here if you're looking for somebody this week. Also, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, more than likely, they're probably not available, but if they are going up against the Cincinnati Bengals, they are by far the defense that I would take here this week. There's not a whole lot of other options out there with a lot of great matchups. The Falcons are another team that a lot of people are going to talk about just because of how well they've played here the past couple weeks. But there's risk there. But if they're available, that's another streaming option also for the defenses here in Week 12. All right, those are my top waiver wire ads here for Week 12 fantasy football. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. Maybe there's somebody else out there that you have a question on. Throw it down below in the comment section. Don't forget, we try to get to as many questions and comments as we can, but this is a community. It's not just us telling people what to do. Scroll through the comments. If somebody is asking a question, give your opinion. That's what all this is about, is just supplying perspective to everybody. Hear other ways to look at a different player. Maybe there's something that you don't see that somebody else does. That's how you build a community, get to know each other, get to go through the comments and converse back and forth with each other. That's where we really strengthen this community as a whole, and that's what we're all about. So we greatly appreciate the support. Good luck this week for Week 12. Make sure you check out all of our start, sits, and rankings videos here coming out second half of the week. We look forward to hearing from you. We'll talk to you later.